there's been some question for a while now, what effect on the conflict ongoing in Ukraine right now China will end up having. And apparently as of today, we finally had a conversation between President Xi Jinping of China and President Biden. And in it, we don't have a full transcript or anything like that, at least as of when we're going live, but Biden apparently, quote, detailed the implications and consequences if Beijing were to provide material support to Russia in its attacks against Ukraine. It also said that Biden had detailed the costs imposed on Russia as a result of the invasion, which implies that the nature of the threat, and God I only hope, was economic in nature rather than some sort of military brinksmanship, which a war with China makes about as much sense for the fate of the human species as one with Russia does. We don't have that much information just yet, but there were a few questions that the press asked of Jen Psaki earlier today about this call. Here's the first.
Did President Xi ever refer to it as an invasion?
We'll let President Xi and his team outline any more specifics about his component of the conversation.
Why not reveal if he called it an invasion or called it a war?
Because we don't, as a policy, speak for other countries. They can speak for themselves.
That's the sort of thing that they do that makes sense to them. To a reasonable person doesn't make any sense whatsoever. They had the call, they said it to our president. He's our representative, why can't we find out what they actually said? We may not care, but I think that we should have access to that information. There was one other back and forth about this though, so let's go to that.
Yesterday, Secretary Blinken said the administration was concerned that China is considering answering Russia's request for more military equipment. After this Joe recall, does the White House still have that concern?
We have that concern. The president detailed what the implications and consequences would be if China provides material support to Russia as it conducts brutal attacks against Ukrainian cities and civilians. And obviously that is something we will be watching and the world will be watching.
So leading up to this point, there had not yet been any evidence that China had been providing any aid to Russia. They deny that they've even been asked, although the belief is that they have. And based on the conversation so far, at least the news coverage of it, we don't know yet much about the conversation that was had. But diplomacy is ongoing of a variety of forms.
So guys, I don't think whether they call it an invasion, a war, a skirmish, a rumble, it matters much. There's what it signals matters, right? So is China going to help Russia or is it not? Because one fact pattern possibility was Russia starts to win. They've got the upper hand, they've got momentum. America tries sanctions, but they don't quite get Switzerland involved and then it's leaking like a sieve, they're not that hurt. Then China and India come in on the side of Russia and Russia wins. Okay, now another fact pattern is we do get Switzerland, Monaco, etc. To be on our side. The oligarchs are actually real hurt. They're putting pressure on Putin. The Ukrainians hold down the fort literally. And then China and India kind of stay out of it because they think Russia might be losing and they don't want to be on the bad end of sanctions and consequences, etc., especially if their ally is going to lose anyway. It looks like we're trending in that second direction, which is good. If China, India, and others join Russia and try to break the sanctions, that's really bad, not just for this conflict, but for future precedent. Can the world get together and say, no, you cannot invade and murder all these people in different countries? Now, of course, the country matters, unfortunately. The world has decided not to do that for Yemen. But even so, doing it for Ukraine is an excellent step forward, and we're so close to being able to do that successfully. That's why China, with its significant power, is so important. If they just sit on the sidelines, good enough. But if they help Russia to try to break the sanctions, both economic and military, then that's bad news for the world.
So my question is, if those two individuals who are driven by control and are fascists and dictators are thinking about this spreading worldwide, why should we trust that they wouldn't get involved?
It's all about, this great question, Ida. It's all about their national self-interest, right? They're not doing anybody any favors. So they, on the one side, they think, well, if Russia takes Ukraine and there isn't much consequences, I guess at a later time we can take Taiwan and there won't be many consequences. So that's obviously has to weigh on their mind, and they're not doing anything out of the goodness of their heart. On the other hand, they think, well, what if Russia fails and then they have to withdraw? And then we're suffering the consequences for what? For nothing. And now we took the damage in terms of world opinion, and that has some consequences in deals that they make throughout the world. Our chances of taking things like Taiwan have been set back even further. Now we've got sanctions and tariffs, et cetera, to deal with. So that they're just weighing that, and that's why if Russia's winning or losing is so important in that equation, because it'll determine whether China gets bigger benefit out of joining them or staying out of it.
Oh, I want to throw out just a few more last updates that I think are really interesting that our audience should know about. One, we were reporting earlier this week about the attack on the theater in Mariupol. Ukraine has now said that they have been able to rescue 130 people from the destroyed building. You're seeing a shot of it right there, and you can note, although obviously it's in Ukrainian, apparently the word for children is the white words that are in front of and in back of the incredibly distinct building, thus providing no explanation for how you could accidentally destroy it. But anyway,
John, real quick, I think that the words are in Russian. They wrote them.
Sorry, I apologize. In Russian. I mean, it was meant to be read by someone who might be targeting this building. That's what I mean. Right. But that leaves something like 1,000 people reportedly, including children, currently in the bunker beneath it, possibly to be rescued. They are trying as we speak. God only knows what will end up happening. I also want to throw out this, and I understand this sort of information is generally presented to make you feel better about the chance of the Ukrainians, and it certainly will help them, but it kind of horrifies me. Here's a photo right now of new drones that are being sent from the US to Ukraine. They're called kamikaze drones. They're called switchblades, and they come in a variety of sizes. But if you're thinking of the sorts of drones you might have seen in warfare before that fly around, launch missiles, those sorts of things, that's not what this is. These are small enough to be carried by an individual person. They are launched out of tubes, and they themselves are the weapons. They are effectively bombs with wings that can be remotely controlled by a person on the ground. They say that it's able to be called off if civilians are nearby or if the target has moved and those sorts of things. Apparently, the Ukrainian forces have already had a great deal of success with what they say are over 50 elite squads of drone operators that have been targeting in the middle of the night with thermal camera equipped drones, Russian troop movements, as well as tanks. These drones can drop tank busting grenades effectively. And all of this is gonna help the Ukrainian forces. I hate that these things even exist though, because once they're out and we've transferred, as part of an $800 million aid package to Ukraine, others will develop them. What about when terrorists get their hands on things like this? I understand that they use drones in some cases already, but it's just devastating to see the proliferation of such easily hideable and movable lethal technology like this.
Wes Clark Jr. on this show about a decade ago predicted this. He said they're gonna create drones that could run into things. I mean, he couldn't have been more right. And so he said, like, we have air superiority here in America. No, we don't. The Chinese are just gonna come up with drones that run into our planes. And here we are, they've got drones that run into things and then explode. They're using them on tanks for now. I don't know the technology well enough to know whether they could also run into planes, but I'm sure that there are varieties of that. And so now, John, obviously the very bad news is more lethal weaponry all across the world is a disaster. The slightly good news is there's a lot of arrogance in the world from the superpowers, including us, about we can invade any country we want, we have air superiority, and they have no chance against us at all. Now you have to ask, do we?
Yeah.
Do we have air superiority? So both America, Russia, China, et cetera, we better watch ourselves because these drones can also go in the hands of people fighting back.
Yeah, I watch it. I'm also scared to see these things. It's horrible I don't ever want those things to become normal, the images of human beings running away. I just want to urge people to remember that while we're cheering on a side, there are innocent people and people's children who are assigned to fight these wars, and that will never come home. And they won't directly benefit anything from what's happening here. This is really about wealth, power, and greed. And I really want people to understand. And I'm so glad you mentioned Yemen, Cenk, because it is happening globally. People are being abused, and we are always the pawns in the game. So don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. We are all the pawns in the game. If we're not sitting at the table, we are all pawns in the game.
Yeah.
All right, last thing, guys. So as you see the Ukrainians fighting back, Ida's right, of course. We defended the Russian people over and over again in this conflict. Amazing journalists, protesters that are fighting for peace in Russia, but also the Russian soldiers we've mentioned. They're real people. They didn't choose this war. It's not their fault. And so don't celebrate too much when you see the tanks getting blown up, etc. Having said that, I also want to say, don't ever judge the Ukrainians. So I don't want to see any crap about, from the Putin apologists, whether they're on the right or pretend left, going, well, the Ukrainians, they're so evil for blowing up a tank that had pointed to their house and was about to murder their family. No, the Ukrainians are allowed to fight back any way they choose. And if Russia doesn't like it, maybe they shouldn't have invaded.
Yeah, I just want to throw out one more thing because I don't think this is going to be a big part of the conversation, but it is going to be worldwide news. It is that there are obviously massive consequences of conflicts like this that ripple out outside of those countries and throughout the globe. And one is that the fact that you might see that Ukraine's supply chain of all sorts is falling apart, including food. That is terrible for the people inside of Ukraine, but it also has worldwide consequences. In particular, wheat shipments from both Ukraine, which is being attacked, and now Russia, considering the conflict and the sanctions, have largely been put on hold. That's 30% of the world's wheat trade comes out of Ukraine and Russia. Apparently now the World Food Program is warning of collateral hunger in some Middle Eastern countries that rely on Ukraine for wheat. Lebanon apparently gets 60% of its wheat from Ukraine. And it is hard to imagine much of any of it being exported in the near future. And so just bear in mind, these conflicts do not just affect the people inside of them, and our decisions in terms of sanctions and all that have worldwide consequences as well.
Yes, and that is all due to Vladimir Putin. And anyone who defends him is an evil, immoral person.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.